We worshipped them. We watched them on screen, sang their songs, and believed every smile they gave us. They were the icons who defined our generation, flawless, untouchable, adored. But what if the people we loved most were hiding the darkest secrets imaginable? What if the comedian who made you laugh was living a double life? What if the director of your favorite film had fled justice for decades? What if the music that shaped your childhood was written by a man capable of unimaginable cruelty? Behind the glitter and glory lies a darkness that fame can no longer disguise. These 25 celebrities once ruled the world, actors, singers, producers, legends. Each of them fell from grace in ways so disturbing they changed Hollywood forever. And when you hear who takes the final spot, the most shocking name of all, you'll question everything you thought you knew about talent, power, and innocence. 25. Colin Walker. Colin K.R. Walker seemed to have the world at his feet. He acted in Superfly, rubbed shoulders with stars, and flaunted a lifestyle dripping with promise. To the public, he was the new voice of cool, young, ambitious, and unstoppable. Yet behind that glossy exterior was a predator hiding in plain sight. Dozens of women came forward, describing almost the same nightmare. They said Walker used his small measure of fame like bait, luring them with talk of modeling shoots or video auditions. The moment they were alone, the charm vanished and fear took its place. Prosecutors called it a pattern of manipulation disguised as opportunity. When the verdict finally arrived in the spring of 2022, it was devastating. The jury convicted him of multiple assaults, and the court handed down a sentence so long it erased any chance of freedom, 50 years to life. Once seen as a talent on the rise, Walker is now a symbol of how fame, when corrupted, becomes the perfect mask for cruelty. 24. Shelley Malil. Shelley Malil made people laugh. He was that familiar funny guy from The 40-Year-Old Virgin, a harmless face who popped up in comedies and left audiences smiling. No one could have imagined what he was capable of. In the summer of 2008, he arrived uninvited at a small barbecue hosted by his former girlfriend. Witnesses recalled that he seemed tense, desperate to talk. Minutes later, the party turned into chaos. Malil grabbed a knife and stabbed her repeatedly more than 20 times as friends tried to pull him away. She barely survived, her voice and body permanently scarred. At trial, the jury heard every horrifying detail. Malil claimed he lost control, but prosecutors described a deliberate act of rage. He was found guilty of attempted murder and given a life sentence with the possibility of parole. To the disbelief of many, he was released years later, free but forever branded by his crime. Once a background comedian, Shelley Malil is now remembered as the man who turned laughter into terror, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary faces can hide the darkest hearts. 23. Joseph Son. Joseph Son's name once floated through Hollywood as nothing more than a trivia footnote, the oddball henchman from Austin Powers, the guy who threw shoes instead of punches. It was comedy at its most ridiculous, and audiences laughed without realizing the horror that shadowed the man behind the joke. Long before he ever stepped onto a film set, Son had committed one of the most brutal crimes in California's modern history. On Christmas Eve of 1990, a young woman walking her dog was abducted, beaten, and repeatedly assaulted for hours before being left naked and bleeding on a golf course. Somehow, she survived, but for almost 20 years, her attackers disappeared into the dark. It wasn't until 2008, when Son's DNA was added to a criminal database after an unrelated arrest, that the truth surfaced. The test results were a perfect match. In 2011, a jury convicted him of torture and sentenced him to life without parole. Months later, he murdered his prison cellmate, sealing his fate forever. The man once cast for laughs is now remembered for sadism. His grinning face from Austin Powers sits beside mugshots that show only emptiness, proof that sometimes Hollywood's monsters don't need costumes. 22. Michael Jace. Michael Jace built a quiet reputation playing police officers and protectors. As Officer Julian Lowe on The Shield, he was convincing, serious, the kind of actor who radiated authority. In real life, that badge of decency shattered in one night of unthinkable violence. In May of 2014, Jace's wife, April, returned home from their son's baseball practice. Minutes later, neighbors heard gunshots. When police arrived, they found April dead and Jace calmly admitting, "I shot my wife." Investigators later learned he had forced their 2 young sons to watch as he fired 3 times, accusing her of cheating, a claim never supported by evidence. At trial, prosecutors described a man eaten alive by resentment and failure. The jury convicted him of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison. His children testified through tears, their words haunting the courtroom. Michael Jace's transformation from television officer to real-life killer stunned even those who knew him. He had once played heroes who saved lives. Now he is a cautionary tale of rage, ego, and the hypocrisy of image. 21. Mark Salling. Mark Salling was once the rebel heartthrob of Glee, the charming misfit with a guitar and a smirk that made teenage fans swoon. He sang love songs on national television, symbolizing the carefree fun of a generation. But away from the cameras, Salling harbored secrets that would destroy everything he built. In late 2015, federal agents descended on his Los Angeles home. What they discovered stunned investigators: tens of thousands of child pornography images and videos, carefully hidden and encrypted. The sheer volume of evidence left little room for doubt. It wasn't a scandal, it was a crime scene. Facing decades behind bars, Salling pleaded guilty to possessing child pornography. He was scheduled for sentencing in early 2018, but he never made it that far. Weeks before facing the judge, he was found dead near his home, an apparent suicide. News of his death left fans and critics divided. Some mourned a fallen star, others refused to forget the lives damaged by his actions. The Glee curse became a pop culture myth, but for many, Salling's case was simply a reminder that fame can amplify both talent and darkness in equal measure. 20. Allison Mack. Allison Mack was once the face of innocence, the bright, loyal friend on Smallville who helped Superman find his way. Her character was defined by courage and morality, but the woman behind the role was living a nightmare scripted by control and cruelty. Drawn into Keith Raniere's NXIVM organization in the mid-2000s, Mack started as a believer in self-improvement. Slowly, she became his enforcer. By the time the cult's inner circle was exposed, she had risen to one of its highest ranks, recruiting women into a secret society that promised empowerment while delivering submission. Members were branded, starved, and blackmailed into obedience. Survivors later testified that Mack was present during branding ceremonies, telling them to embrace the pain as proof of devotion. When the FBI finally intervened, the story exploded worldwide. Mack was arrested and charged with sex trafficking and racketeering. In court, she tearfully admitted her crimes, calling her time in NXIVM the biggest mistake of my life. Her cooperation helped convict Raniere, but it couldn't erase the damage. After serving her sentence, she was released quietly in 2023, avoiding interviews or public appearances. Once seen as a beacon of strength, Allison Mack is now remembered as a cautionary tale of how fame and vulnerability can be weaponized by manipulation. 19. Robert Blake. Robert Blake's face once defined an era of television and cinema. A child actor turned Hollywood veteran, he played tough men with broken souls, earning praise for his raw realism. But in the early 2000s, that gritty image transformed into something far darker, a real-life murder mystery that captivated the nation. In 2001, Blake's wife, Bonnie Lee Bakley, was shot dead outside a Los Angeles restaurant. Their relationship had long been fraught with distrust. Friends said it was more battle than marriage. Blake claimed he had returned to the restaurant to retrieve a gun he'd left behind when the shooting happened. Investigators didn't buy it. They accused him of plotting her death, saying his story was too neat, too convenient. The trial became a media circus. Celebrities, neighbors, and former colleagues filled the witness list. In 2005, the jury acquitted Blake of murder, but the victory was hollow. Months later, a civil jury found him liable for his wife's wrongful death and ordered him to pay millions in damages. By then, Hollywood had turned its back. His reputation was gone, his finances ruined, and his name forever tied to the question that no verdict could erase. Did Robert Blake get away with murder? 18. Sid Vicious. Sid Vicious embodied chaos. As the bassist of the Sex Pistols, he was more than a musician. He was punk, incarnate, reckless, sneering, and self-destructive. Fans saw him as the ultimate rebel, but rebellion soon turned to ruin. In October of 1978, Sid's girlfriend, Nancy Spungen, was found dead in their room at New York's Chelsea Hotel. She'd been stabbed in the stomach. Sid was arrested, confessing at first, then claiming he couldn't remember what happened. Their relationship had been toxic, a cocktail of heroin, jealousy, and dependency. Friends called them a disaster waiting to happen. While awaiting trial, Sid was released on bail. But the story never reached its conclusion. Just 4 months later, he overdosed on heroin at the age of 21. Nancy's murder case closed with no conviction, leaving her family without answers, and Sid immortalized as punk's most tragic anti-hero. Today, Sid Vicious is frozen in legend, a young man who wanted to live fast, love wildly, and burn out before the world could make him grow up. But beneath the myth lies the truth. His rebellion left blood on the floor, and a question that punk history will never escape. 17. Ezra Miller. Ezra Miller once looked unstoppable, a new kind of star for a new generation. With haunting performances in We Need to Talk About Kevin and The Perks of Being a Wallflower, they were praised as bold, fearless, and unpredictable. When Miller stepped into the role of the Flash, it felt like destiny, a misunderstood outsider finally taking center stage. But then the speedster fell faster than anyone imagined. In the early 2020s, headlines about Miller shifted from acclaim to alarm. Reports of erratic and violent behavior surfaced: arrests in Hawaii for assaults, allegations of grooming young fans, and disturbing accounts of manipulation. Police described a spiral of chaos: fights in bars, restraining orders, even a charge for burglary. Miller eventually pleaded guilty to trespassing while denying other claims, but the damage was already done. Studios hesitated, fans recoiled, and their once promising career went into freefall. The Flash's future, once built around Miller, turned into a public relations disaster for Warner Brothers. Now Ezra Miller exists in limbo, neither condemned nor redeemed. To some, they are the tragic victim of their own instability. To others, they represent Hollywood's refusal to hold its rising stars accountable until it's too late. 16. Charlie Sheen. Charlie Sheen wasn't just famous, he was television royalty. With his quick wit and effortless charm, he turned 2.5 Men into one of the biggest sitcoms in the world. For years, audiences adored him as the lovable rogue, the bad boy who never really crossed the line. Then, he did. Behind the punchlines was a man spiraling out of control. Drug binges, sex scandals, violent altercations every week brought new headlines. His relationships ended in lawsuits and restraining orders. In 2011, his feud with the show's producers exploded publicly. Sheen unleashed profanity-laced rants that spawned viral catchphrases like "winning" and "tiger blood," while his career collapsed in real time. The most shocking moment came years later, when Sheen revealed he was HIV positive and had known for years before disclosing it. Several women accused him of exposing them without warning, deepening the outrage. Today, Charlie Sheen's legacy is split in two: the charismatic comedian who could carry a series on his back, and the destructive force who torched his own empire. His story is not just about fame lost, it's about how self-destruction became his only lasting role. 15. Armie Hammer. Armie Hammer was born into privilege, the grandson of a billionaire, a man who seemed carved for stardom. With his classic features and smooth confidence, he embodied Hollywood's golden boy ideal. His performances in The Social Network and Call Me by Your Name cemented him as a leading man with both charm and gravitas. Then came the fall, swift, public, and grotesque. In early 2021, social media exploded with screenshots of messages allegedly sent by Hammer to several women. The contents were graphic, filled with disturbing fantasies of domination, control, and even cannibalism. One by one, women came forward accusing him of emotional manipulation, coercion, and assault. The details were lurid, the tone obsessive, and the damage irreversible. Hammer denied the accusations, calling them vicious lies. No criminal charges have been filed, and yet his career disintegrated almost overnight. Major studios dropped him, roles vanished, and his agents cut all ties. What had once been a trajectory toward superstardom became an implosion played out for the world to see. Today, Armie Hammer's name carries a strange weight, part scandal, part urban legend. Whether guilty or misunderstood, he has become the symbol of a new kind of downfall, one where digital evidence can ruin a life long before a courtroom ever has the chance. 14. Jonathan Majors. Jonathan Majors was supposed to be the future. Hollywood hailed him as the next great leading man, magnetic, intense, and endlessly versatile. From Lovecraft Country to Creed III, he drew praise from critics and audiences alike, and when he stepped into the Marvel Universe as Kang the Conqueror, his place in pop culture seemed untouchable. But behind the charisma was a temper that would soon undo it all. In March of 2023, Majors was arrested in New York following a violent altercation with his girlfriend, Grace Jabari. Police reported bruises and a broken finger. Text messages showed a disturbing mix of control and apology. Majors denied the assault, claiming he was the victim, but witnesses and evidence told another story. The trial that followed was short and brutal. In December, a jury convicted him of assault and harassment. Instead of prison, he received mandatory counseling and probation, but Hollywood wasted no time cutting him off. Marvel recast his role, studios shelved his projects, and endorsement deals vanished. Majors' fall from grace is among the fastest in memory. Within a single year, he went from being the industry's rising powerhouse to a cautionary tale about how power and ego can collide with devastating speed. The tragedy isn't just his career, it's how quickly greatness can decay when fame feeds the illusion of control. 13. Jared Fogle. There was a time when Jared Fogle was seen as a national success story, the ordinary man who lost hundreds of pounds by eating Subway sandwiches. His transformation made him famous overnight. He toured schools, gave motivational talks, and became a symbol of health, discipline, and optimism. Parents trusted him, children adored him. The company built an empire on his smile. But behind the wholesome image lay something sickening. In 2015, federal investigators raided his home, uncovering thousands of child pornography files and evidence that he had solicited sex from minors. The findings weren't rumors or tabloid gossip, they were forensic, cold, and undeniable. Fogle eventually pleaded guilty to distribution of child pornography and illicit sexual contact with minors. The judge, condemning the sheer scope of his crimes, sentenced him to over 15 years in prison and ordered him to register as a sex offender for life. The brand that made him famous erased him overnight. Subway commercials vanished. His name was scrubbed from every campaign. Once celebrated as an inspiration, Jared Fogle is now remembered only as a predator, the man who turned a feel-good success story into one of America's most revolting betrayals of trust. 12. Phil Spector. Phil Spector was the kind of genius who shaped the sound of an era. His wall of sound technique turned simple pop songs into grand cinematic experiences. He worked with the Ronettes, the Beatles, and countless others, redefining what music could be. For years he was untouchable, eccentric, brilliant, and feared. But the genius was never far from madness. Behind closed doors, Spector was notorious for his temper and obsession with control. Friends and musicians whispered about guns waved in recording sessions, of women terrified to leave his mansion. In February of 2003, those rumors turned to tragedy when actress Lana Clarkson was found dead from a gunshot wound in his home. Spector insisted she had taken her own life. The prosecution called it murder, another victim of his violent rage. After one mistrial, a second jury in 2009 convicted him of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 19 years to life, dying behind bars in 2021. Today, his story stands as one of art's cruelest contradictions. A man who could create sonic beauty and commit unspeakable brutality. Phil Spector's legacy isn't just about the music he made, but the life he took and the darkness that echoed through every note. 11. Danny Masterson. Danny Masterson was once the laid-back rebel everyone loved to watch on that '70s show. He was cool without trying, sarcastic without being cruel, and part of a television family that defined a generation. Off-camera, though, that easygoing charm hid something horrifying. Throughout the early 2000s, multiple women accused Masterson of drugging and raping them inside his Hollywood Hills home. Many were members of the Church of Scientology, which, according to their testimonies, urged silence and obedience instead of justice. Their stories described a pattern of manipulation, secrecy, and fear, a powerful institution shielding one of its own. Years passed before justice caught up. In 2023, after a retrial and emotional testimony from survivors, Masterson was found guilty of raping 2 women. The judge called his crimes planned and predatory as he handed down a sentence of 30 years to life in prison. The verdict shook Hollywood. Once a nostalgic icon of teen television, Masterson is now a convicted rapist serving a lifetime sentence. His fall also exposed the darker questions around Scientology's influence. How many voices were silenced to protect one man's illusion of fame? 10. Marilyn Manson. Few artists have ever embraced darkness the way Marilyn Manson did. With his painted face, eerie persona, and grotesque performances, he built a career on shock value. To fans, he was rebellion made flesh, a man unafraid to become the villain. But as the years passed, it became harder to tell where the stage act ended and the real man began. In the late 2010s, multiple women, including actress Evan Rachel Wood, accused Manson of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. They described an atmosphere of total control, sleep deprivation, manipulation, and degradation, disguised as art. Several lawsuits alleged that he created a cult-like household, using his fame and influence to dominate women psychologically and physically. Manson denied every accusation, calling the claims twisted fabrications. Some lawsuits were dismissed, others are still moving through the courts. But the tidal wave of allegations ended his career almost overnight. Record labels dropped him, television roles disappeared, and his name became shorthand for depravity in the music world. Marilyn Manson's legacy is now split clean in two. To his fans, he remains an artist misunderstood by society. To his accusers, he is proof that evil doesn't need a mask. Sometimes it wears makeup, stands under a spotlight, and calls it performance. 9. Chris Brown. Chris Brown's rise was meteoric. At just a teenager, he was hailed as the next Michael Jackson, a gifted singer and dancer whose smooth voice and electric moves won over millions. His charm, his smile, and his effortless style made him one of the brightest stars of his generation. Then came a night that changed everything. In early 2009, the world woke up to a photo of pop superstar Rihanna, bruised, battered, and nearly unrecognizable. The news spread like wildfire. Chris Brown had assaulted her after an argument, and the image of her injuries became an indelible scar on his career. He pleaded guilty to felony assault, received probation and community service, and apologized publicly. But the damage was permanent. In the years that followed, Brown's temper remained headline material, from violent outbursts and restraining orders to accusations of further abuse. The controversies piled up. Even as he continued releasing hits and performing sold-out shows, his name never escaped its shadow. To this day, Chris Brown divides the world. Some call him a flawed genius who paid his dues. Others see him as a man who never truly took responsibility. His story is the modern tragedy of fame, how one act of violence can forever overshadow a lifetime of talent. 8. Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey once represented everything Hollywood revered: intelligence, charisma, and control. With 2 Academy Awards and countless acclaimed performances, he was the actor's actor, a craftsman who could make villains magnetic and heroes complex. Then, in 2017, the curtain fell. It began when actor Anthony Rapp accused Spacey of making sexual advances toward him decades earlier, when Rapp was just a teenager. In the weeks that followed, dozens of others came forward with similar accounts, stories of intimidation, assault, and exploitation that stretched across continents and decades. Productions shut down overnight. Netflix cut ties with him, erasing his presence from House of Cards and reshooting entire films to remove his scenes. Though Spacey has since been acquitted in court in both the United States and the United Kingdom, the sheer volume of allegations left his reputation in ruins. He vanished from public life, his awards gathering dust as his legacy turned to ash. Kevin Spacey's story is not just one of personal downfall, it is a story about the end of Hollywood invincibility. Once a symbol of artistic mastery, he became a case study in how quickly power crumbles when truth finally finds a voice. 7. Roman Polanski. Roman Polanski's name once stood for cinematic brilliance. The director of Chinatown and Rosemary's Baby shaped the language of modern film. Critics called him a genius, and actors clamored to work under his vision. Yet behind his artistry was a crime that would forever taint his legacy. In 1977, Polanski was accused of drugging and sexually assaulting a 13-year-old girl during a photo shoot at actor Jack Nicholson's home. The story sent shockwaves through Hollywood. He pleaded guilty to unlawful sex with a minor as part of a plea deal, but before sentencing, he fled the United States and never returned. For decades, Polanski worked in exile, directing acclaimed films and winning awards abroad, even an Oscar for The Pianist. But every triumph came with protest, every accolade shadowed by the reminder that justice had never been served. His supporters call him a misunderstood artist, haunted by tragedy. His critics call him a fugitive who escaped accountability. Roman Polanski remains one of cinema's greatest contradictions, a man whose films probe the nature of guilt and innocence, even as his own life remains the ultimate example of both. 6. O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson was the American dream made flesh, a record-breaking athlete who became a movie star and pitchman, beloved by fans of all ages. He was charming, photogenic, and successful, a symbol of achievement and opportunity. That image disintegrated overnight in 1994 when his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ronald Goldman were found brutally murdered outside her Los Angeles home. What followed was the most sensational trial in American history. Millions watched daily as prosecutors laid out DNA evidence, while Simpson's defense team, the so-called Dream Team, cast doubt on every detail, alleging racial bias and police misconduct. When the verdict of not guilty was read in 1995, the country split in two. Some saw justice, others saw proof that celebrity could buy freedom. Years later, a civil court found him liable for the deaths, ordering him to pay millions to the victims' families. He would go on to serve time for an unrelated armed robbery conviction in Nevada, but his name will forever be synonymous with one question: did he get away with murder? O.J. Simpson's fall marked the moment America realized that fame doesn't just protect people, it can also distort justice. His story blurred the line between sports hero, celebrity, and suspect, leaving a legacy as infamous as it is unforgettable. 5. Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson once reigned as Hollywood's golden son, a blockbuster hero turned visionary filmmaker. From Lethal Weapon to Braveheart, he was adored for his rugged charm and relentless drive. But the man who once stood for courage and triumph would soon become the face of rage and disgrace. In 2006, Gibson's reputation imploded. After being pulled over for drunk driving, he launched into a hate-filled rant, spewing anti-Semitic slurs at the arresting officers. The tirade made global headlines and obliterated his image overnight. Though he issued apologies and blamed alcoholism, the damage was irreversible. Years later, recordings emerged of Gibson screaming threats and racist insults at his partner, Oksana Grigorieva, alongside allegations of domestic violence. The outbursts painted a portrait of a man consumed by anger, someone whose brilliance had curdled into bitterness. While Gibson has since tried to rebuild his career with films like Hacksaw Ridge, the stain of his words lingers. His story stands as a reminder that no amount of talent can outshine hatred, and that the true measure of a man isn't his art, but what he reveals when the mask slips. 4. R. Kelly. R. Kelly's voice once defined an era. He wrote anthems of hope and desire. I Believe I Can Fly soared across generations, played at graduations, weddings, and sports arenas. To the world, he was a musical genius. But behind the stage lights, Kelly built an empire of control, abuse, and silence. For decades, rumors trailed him: underage relationships, secret marriages, and settlements hushed behind closed doors. When the documentary Surviving R. Kelly aired in 2019, the whispers became evidence. Women spoke of being trapped in his orbit, cut off from their families, manipulated, and terrorized into submission. In 2021, Kelly was found guilty in federal court of sex trafficking and racketeering. Prosecutors described him as the leader of a criminal organization built on fear and exploitation. The following year, he received an additional sentence for child pornography charges. The man who once inspired millions now sits in a prison cell, his songs forever redefined by his crimes. R. Kelly's legacy is not the music that lifted people up, but the pain he inflicted on those he kept down. 3. Bill Cosby. For decades, Bill Cosby was America's most trusted father figure, the sweater-wearing symbol of warmth, laughter, and family values. He broke barriers for black entertainers and built a reputation on decency, education, and love. But behind that friendly voice and comforting smile, there was another story, one that rewrote everything the world thought it knew about him. Over 60 women have accused Cosby of drugging and sexually assaulting them, their testimonies stretching back more than half a century. The details echoed one another: drinks spiked, memories blurred, and mornings filled with confusion and shame. Some tried to speak out, only to be ignored or silenced by lawyers and power. For years he lived untouched, his fame shielding him from consequence. That illusion shattered when the case of Andrea Constand forced the truth into the open. In 2018, a jury convicted Cosby of aggravated, indecent assault. He was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, the image of America's dad-turned-predator burned into history. 3 years later, his conviction was overturned on a legal technicality, and he walked free, but public opinion never forgave him. Bill Cosby's name, once synonymous with comfort and laughter, is now a symbol of betrayal. He taught America to believe in good men. Then he showed how easily even the most trusted can deceive. 2. Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein wasn't just a producer, he was a kingmaker. His name stood behind Oscar-winning films, his influence spread through every studio, and his approval could make or break a career. But power became his weapon, and the empire he built was founded on silence and fear. For decades, women whispered stories about hotel rooms, closed doors, and impossible choices. When the New York Times and the New Yorker finally published the truth in 2017, the world watched the walls of Hollywood tremble. Dozens of women, actresses, assistants, executives came forward, their accounts eerily similar: coercion disguised as opportunity, consent stolen under pressure. Weinstein denied it all, but the evidence spoke louder than his words. In 2020, he was convicted in New York of rape and sexual assault. 3 years later, another jury in Los Angeles found him guilty again. The sentences combined to ensure he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. His downfall marked more than the end of one man's reign. It sparked a movement. The Me Too era began with his exposure, forcing the entertainment industry to reckon with its own complicity. Once the face of Hollywood success, Harvey Weinstein is now the cautionary symbol of power abused beyond redemption. 1. Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson was more than a superstar. He was a force of nature. The king of pop transformed music, dance, and fame itself. With Thriller, he became untouchable, an artist whose talent transcended generations and borders. He was adored, idolized, and mythologized. But the higher his light shone, the darker the shadow that followed him. From the early 1990s onward, allegations began to swirl whispers that Jackson had inappropriate relationships with young boys at his Neverland ranch. Parents spoke of lavish gifts, sleepovers, and blurred boundaries that made the world uneasy. In 1993, he quietly settled a civil lawsuit out of court, a decision many saw as proof of guilt, even as others defended him with equal fervor. In 2005, he faced criminal charges of child molestation. The trial was a global spectacle, tearful witnesses, relentless media coverage, and a defense that painted him as a misunderstood eccentric. After months of testimony, the jury acquitted him on all counts. To his fans, it was vindication. To his critics, a failure of justice. Even after his death in 2009, the accusations refused to fade. The documentary Leaving Neverland, released a decade later, reignited outrage and reopened old wounds. Two men described years of grooming and abuse, their words reigniting one of pop culture's fiercest debates. Michael Jackson's legacy now exists in two worlds, one filled with music, moonwalks, and miracles, the other haunted by allegations that refuse to die. No court ever convicted him, yet suspicion remains a permanent part of his story. In the end, he is both legend and enigma, proof that even the brightest stars can cast the longest shadows. Fame can build empires, but it can also hide rot beneath the gold. Behind the red carpets and award speeches lies a truth that Hollywood would rather we forget, that the same spotlight that makes someone a star can also expose what they've done in the dark. These 25 stories remind us that power and charisma are no guarantees of goodness. Some of these people were convicted, others only accused, but all of them changed how we see fame forever. Their names, once synonymous with talent and glory, now echo in whispers about corruption, cruelty, and the price of silence. So, what do you think? Did our final name truly deserve the #1 spot? Or is there another fallen icon you believe belongs here? Tell us in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into the forgotten corners of fame and the scandals Hollywood tried to bury, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with us. Because in this town, every light casts a shadow, and we're here to reveal them all.